Sup? Welcome to Tales Tomorrow. I am Morrow, your storyteller for today, and with me I have some more RPG horror stories. I would like to apologize to everybody who has sent me email recently about different RPG horror stories and RPG horror story submissions. I am so sorry for not checking back. It's been a while. I've been busy with this, the whole diabetes thing and just adjusting to everything, and it's just been a lot. We're gonna have a day where we just go through the email submissions specifically. I promise you, at some point. Not right now. I'm gonna just try to get some things out of the way so I can get started with the beginning of the week, which I'll talk about in the next video intro. In next video intro, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, let's get some RPG horror stories for today. AITA, Bard quits my campaign after intentionally trying to kill his character. I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for roughly 11 years at the time of writing this, and I like to think those years have afforded me pretty solid understanding of how to run a campaign. Not everything that reinvents the metaphorical wheel, mind you, and I do have the unhealthy clutch of cliches my party are probably never surprised to see in a campaign I run, but I've only had minor complaints at worst. That was until recently when I had a player just up and leave the table in the middle of a session and texted the entire group that I was a terrible, arrogant dungeon master. Which brings me to today to inquire you with unbiased individuals to ask the titular question: am I the a-hole? Sorry, I got distracted when you said the word titular. My brain is rotted today. I'm sorry. I really shouldn't be recording, but I really want to. So let's get to the story. I've been running this campaign for about 4 years, off and on due to work schedule conflicts, university, and occasional instance of inspirational burnout. But all things considered, it has been nothing short of the best campaign I've ever been a part of. So many cool memories of players outsmarting me in my encounters, roleplay moments that occasionally feel like absolute cinema, and combat that, well, combat always drags on a bit too long, but that big "how do you want to do this" moment more often than not hits the table with celebration. We run this campaign just a local game shop. It's not like a big franchise or anything, especially not a small town in the backwoods, just a modest little shop that runs its Magic the Gathering and Warhammer 40k tournaments and the like. But every second Wednesday evening, right after 5 p.m, it's closing time and we get the place to ourselves as I run a ragtag of 7 to 8 misfits through my homebrew world to fend off the forces of impending doom. I set the scene like this to express that I'm in a pretty fortunate position. A very cool and convenient setting, a cool and more often than not reliable group to run the game for, and the only real setback is that the owner of the store still charges us for drinks we take from the fridge after closing time. So honestly, it's been nothing but great from my perspective. That was until the bard joined the group. At some point, the ranger of the party was taking to some friends about all of the above, plus we're now in the final arc of our campaign as level 14 characters. One of those friends, from what he later told me, just seemingly invited himself to join. He showed up with the ranger early in the day, and when it came to closing time, he just didn't leave. Didn't talk to me about joining or anything for the 1 or 2 hours he had been there for. Just waited until everyone else was clearing out to inform me that he was excited to play. I didn't really know him at that point. He was just kind of a phase that floated in and out occasionally, and ranger was his ride home, so he just invited himself to stay. Two things could be going on here: either just a really awkward person that for the most part means well but just doesn't understand social cues, which could be always a possibility, or if the story is, the story to be believed that it kind of entered into like a horrible thing, maybe it's somebody that thought, hey, I want to join in, I'm not going to ask Amy to join in, I'm just going to invite myself in because I'm so self-important. Because funnily enough, you would think it's like a cartoon villain kind of esque thing, but people like that actually exist. Whenever you're doing something fun, they say, oh cool, what's going on, I'm joining in, and just like, I already had like a group and everything planned out. No, it's okay, I'll join in, I'll be part of this, what are we doing? And it just becomes like a thing. They don't get it until eventually you just gotta tell them, look, we're already booked, you can't be part of this, get out. It feels painful to say, and it feels like, obviously hurtful to say. Nobody wants to reject somebody like this, but there's some people that genuinely don't get the clues and stuff, and at times you just gotta be direct with them. I don't want to be necessarily mean about it, like I'm not an a-hole. Okay, maybe I'm a little bit of an a-hole, but usually to my friends. But at the end of the day, if somebody just doesn't get it, they don't get it. So I'm gonna just tell them straight up, there's no point of trying to mince words or trying to kind of tiptoe eggshell your way around this. Sometimes if somebody's not invited, you gotta tell them, listen, this is a closed group, you're not gonna be a thing, get an Uber or something. If the play was great and all, that'd be no problem. It'd just be a little awkward interaction from the very beginning. But if they force themselves in like SWAT style right at your doorstep, it's just not okay. I'm not cool with that. Now this irked me, obviously. It's rude to invite yourself to someone else's game, and on top of that, not even ask the DM until minutes before this session was about to start. But I'm unfortunately a little bit of a pushover. We had a bit of a revolving door of players over the years, and just recently the cleric of the party had to bow out for the foreseeable future due to his university courses. So I somehow, the utter spinelessness, talked myself into letting him join and postpone the session for an hour, to set the new player up and give him the crash course. An hour is going to be still a difficult thing to do because like that's an hour spent to make a player character at level 14. That's a lot of spells to go through, that's a lot of selections to go through, that's a lot of features to cover, what subclass you want to play, what features you want to grab, what feats you're grabbing, what ASI score you're doing. That will be a lot to do, and the fact that you can do it in under an hour, that's honestly impressive, or at least around an hour. That took me at least 2 hours tops because that's a lot. At the same time, a lot of my players are new, so yeah, that would be understandable why it'd be a lot to go through. On average, when I help my friends create a character, like the very first D&D character ever, it takes about 30 minutes to an hour, depends on how complex the class is, or they have spell casting and I have to explain the stuff and how Foundry works and everything, so yeah, I could see an hour being a bit of a crunch time. Luckily, he already built his character and to the exact level of the rest of the party, which saved so much time. Wait. How much did Ranger tell them? If they know Ranger, if the Ranger was the ride and talked about the game to them, how much did they have everything prepared? I mean, convenient the fact they had everything prepared because they're like, you know, I would definitely get on this game. I'll get a character sheet prepared. Convenience and everything, but still, that's a lot. How much did they know and how much did they prepare? Were they betting on the TM being a pushover and just wanted to force themselves, just ham-fist themselves into the game? I'm a little bit off frame, so I need to like back up and stuff. Just ham-fist themselves into the game like that? Convenient, but still a little bit sus, in my opinion. The only thing that raised an eyebrow was that he had pre-rolled his stats at home and apparently had nothing lower than a 15 after all the leveling with 2 stats at 20. I told him that his campaign used a standard array because I felt it made the entire table feel more on equal footing, which he seemed a little reluctant about, but agreed so long as he could take a first level feat. I allowed everyone else too, so that was fine with me. I gave him a crash course of the story so far and he seemed really stoked, asking questions about how his character can be involved. Luckily, we're at a perfect point in the story for a new player to join in as the party enters a port town, looking to commandeer a vessel towards an archipelago, either one of those, in which a dragon lair had been speculated to be. Though Bard was some Shakespearean actor that fell out of the proverbial limelight due to vices and cutthroat competition, so they sought a stage in which to propel themselves back into stardom. The Sovereign King happened to be a dragon masquerading as a human to hoard the wealth of the entire continent, so writing a stage play about overthrowing the tyrannical beast and making himself the main character sounded pretty metal. All looked good as we took our seats and we got the game going. That was until you started playing the character. I get there are people who just can't roleplay because they feel embarrassed doing so or feel too self-conscious to put on a voice, so you kind of have to temper the expectations, but man, he didn't even try. Set the scene for like character introduction and they took it as far as his name is Bertie McBerdison, he's really famous, and looks Shakespeare but blonde and younger. Again, I understand nerves right out of the gate, but over the course of 5 or 6 sessions, this never changed. I understand if somebody is brand new to the game and they don't feel comfortable and stuff. I mean, hell, I have a lot of my friends that are just getting used to the whole experience because, yeah, it's weird at first. When I first tried D&D, yeah, it was weird at first. And I did it on someone's live stream. Actually, it was my own live stream. That was back when I first tried D&D for the very first time as my VTuber persona. And yeah, it was really awkward and weird and strange. I wasn't used to it whatsoever. I was put onto the spotlight and I just kind of floundered about, but somehow made it through. I don't know. I was pretty nervous. But so I understand if somebody is brand new to the thing and then nervous as well, which is why I as a DM try to do my very best to put on silly voices. If you as a DM can be the silliest person at the table, it's gonna make everybody else feel a lot more comfortable and chill, because instead of like feeling awkward, they're laughing and maybe catching on with the jokes and maybe putting on a character and trying their best and just having fun, because at the end of the day, that's all about it. It's all about having fun. Why is my eyes closed? Meant to do this. That's what I meant to do. Anyway, it's not like everybody has to have like some sort of a character they put on, but if everybody else at the table is putting on the effort, it's fine to put on a little bit, you know, let's make a voice rough and gruff or overly expressive and, I don't know, flamboyant. Does that count as flamboyant? I don't know what counts as flamboyant anymore. Anyway, let's get going. The party stays at a local tavern. I persuade the tavern keeper that I'm so famous and don't need to pay for a room. He meets a beautiful woman in said tavern. I seduce her in joining me in bed tonight. The party asks to know more about him since he's joining them on their adventure. I tell them my entire backstory, so they understand why I've joined them. Okay, never mind. This is going way too far. It's like the entering, you know what you're doing? You're entering like Fallout or like, not even Mass Effect. Mass Effect doesn't have anything like that. You're entering Dragon Age Veilguard type responses. Or like a Fallout dialogue where it's like parentheses, describe your entire backstory, parentheses. You know, you could just get in character as well and use it as a practice instead of just narrating your decision for the character. My character does this now. My character is gonna say this. My character talks about the epitome of the mortal coil. Okay, why not just talk about the mortal coil? Why not talk about your backstory? Why not just say this and do this and actually express yourself? You know, like everybody else at the table. I mean, you literally force yourself into the game. The least you could do is try a little bit. He never really got out of this bare minimum interactivity with this roleplay side of things. He had friends at the table trying to gauge him and his character, but even they give up after a while, which wouldn't be too egregious, mind you, except anytime other people were roleplaying, he kind of shoehorned himself into the scene with some quip, Barty McBartison interrupts and asks to get to the point of this conversation. Few people at the table, including myself, had to ask him to allow time for people to roleplay their characters, even if he likes to be brief with it himself. But even though he agreed he would, he continued to interject his character just to push scenes along. I come to find out he's more into the wargame aspect of D&D and approaches the game like a meat grinder, except he's a support that debuffs the enemies en masse and despite being a bard has no affinity to contribute anything entertaining otherwise. If you're looking for a wargame type of game, then why not just look for a regular wargame type of game? Or hey, maybe ask your ranger friend, hey, are your games more roleplay heavy or are they more combat heavy? That's it. You would have the answer there. You would find out there's a lot of roleplay and interaction and that it's not about the wargame specifically. I understand if you just want to do the combat and the battles and stuff for like a D&D game. Combat in D&D can be hella fun. It can be super fun. But at the end of the day, you gotta join a game that has that as a focus, not just join any game and expecting to bend around your will just because you're used to a specific type of play style. Let people roleplay. It's not a big deal. Besides, you're a guest that forced yourself into this game. Shut up and be quiet. Let people roleplay. And then you can continue with, my character walks over to the tavern and asks for a room over at the bar. Because apparently that's the kind of roleplay that you want. You know, at least you could learn something from the rest of the players. At least if you're gonna be inviting yourself in, at least you can mesh a little bit better. I'm not saying the players shouldn't try to mesh. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, they'll root to invite themselves, but it would be a whole other story if they were awkwardly inviting themselves in, but instead contributed and were a fun player to be with. It would be like an awkward introduction for being awkward introduction, which ended up being a good story. In here, however, this guy's being extremely rude and inconsiderate of the other players and the DM's time, and really everybody's time. He was really starting to bring down the vibe of the table, and this is where I start to think that maybe I'm the a-hole. I wanted his character to die. Ranger told me the bard player was really attached to his character and used it in a number of campaigns that kinda just died over time. He was really bringing down the vibe of our games and I just didn't have the social spoons to just ask him not to come back anymore. Hell, I would hate it if someone told me that, but despite my many, and I can't stress this enough, many attempts to ask him to show patience when combat isn't initiated and not harsh the vibes of players wanting to do some role-playing in the role-playing game, he only ever seemed to agree with me just to shut me up and not change a single thing. So I admit, when the final encounter of the dragon, I put him in a line of fire a lot with that intention in mind. Not all the time, especially if I couldn't justify it, but a lot of the time the dragon had some form of hate boner for the bard that kept casting debuffs on him. DM, in this situation, honestly, I can't blame you. But I think this is also an important lesson in general. At some point as a DM, you need to put your foot down and say, no, that's not happening. That's not going on. You are being a problem player. Please don't return again. Or if you don't change, I'm kicking you out of the game. Unless things change and you stop being an a-hole in the game and start harshing the vibes, you're out of the game. Because at the end of the day, it affects everybody, including the DM, including the players. It affects everybody at the table. And as a DM, unfortunately, I have this responsibility. We have to be the arbiter of the group in a way, in a sense. You are the one that calls the shots at the end of the day. What happens? Dragon appears, rocks fall, a thunderstorm happens, a large 1,000 tiny mice appear from under the ground, roll initiative. That'd be an insane combat to run. 1,000 tiny mice combat? Oh, that'd be insane. But at the end of the day, you have the role of calling the shots of what's going on in the game, and especially of who is welcome at your games. If this guy is just not improving and it's constantly bringing the mood down and it's affecting the enjoyment of yourself and other players, it's important to learn for the future, not right now. I mean, this is in hindsight 2020, but for the future, that at some point you need to bring your foot down and say no. It is important to learn how to say no, especially to problem players, and to stop them on the tracks. And if they're not going to change at all, say, hey, unless you're changing, I'm just not going to have you in a game. I will not tolerate this. This is not okay. I won't allow you to do whatever you want to do. I understand why you think you're the a-hole, but you literally want to kill the character because you can't stand the guy. And there's nothing wrong with you. You just can't stand the guy because he doesn't change no matter how much you ask him to stop. And it's a normal thing to want to just not have a problem player in your games. This is clearly a problem player. Nobody's enjoying himself, including you. It's getting to the point where you really just want to kill off the character because they're so attached to the character, because they want to have some sort of a lash out at them, because they constantly pester and annoy everybody else at the table. Either way, I'm gonna finish the story because I'm interested to see what would happen next. I mean, it's important to learn these sort of lessons, but there's still more story to tell. By some divine intervention or lying about his damage taken, I can't honestly guess which, he pulled through. Disappointed but not mad, I gave the description of the dragon succumbing to the wounds of magic punctures and cuts through blades and crashing into the hoard of gold and treasures that rain over coin over the party in waves of fortunes. But as they began to celebrate, the Sovereign King's voice could be heard, laughing in amusement. The big reveal of over a year and a half. The dragon wasn't masquerading as a Sovereign King. The Sovereign King was an outer god. Thinking like Nyarlathotep, hope I pronounce it correctly, from Lovecraftian lore, who had been following the treasure to the dragon all for the purposes of possessing his draconic body when it was at most powerful to become a world equivalent of a Dracolich. Phase 2 boss fight. Begin! I put a custom miniature on the table and everyone was going nuts. I was so proud. Fortunately for them, the possession takes a lot of the outer god's power, and the dragon physical resources were all but spent. But they were at death's door in their own right, and they were going to be separated as the Dracolich foretold their downfall and announced his intentions to go scorch earth on the realms and then cast the gods into the ether for all eternity. I'll persuade him not to do that. There's an awkward, palpable silence over the table as everyone looks towards Bard. For the first time since he joined the group, he showed an emotion beyond contemptuous indifference as he leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, perhaps even the biggest crap-eating grin I've ever seen. And how do you do that? Far be it from me to be the DM that tells a player no when they want to try something, but he didn't sound like it was something he wanted to try. It sounded like he wanted to do. No change in expression whatsoever. I want, in a Shakespearean monologue, to persuade his puny god to go back to wherever he came from and spare the realms. Awkward silence number 2. But this one came with eyes in my direction. I'm not the best at reading people's faces, but it ranged from looking at me expectantly from a ruling, others were shaking their heads either in disbelief or mild amusement, this is being attempted, to even range with his face in his hands. None of which I personally translated as any of them expecting this approach to work. Okay, but how do you persuade him to do that? I don't know, I just told him to give up and go away. At least try a little bit, man. You have a moment where you can actually say something important or interesting. This isn't an RPG where you just say, I just say something important. At least get in character. At least try to rationalize it. I don't know how the people do the charisma rolls for like deception, intimidation, persuasion. But for me, personally, depends on what you say or how you say it or what specifically you say can influence some level of difficulty check for me personally. And in fact, for Mary and Mike as well, whenever we run these sort of games, we want to make sure, since in our previous game, the horror story that I talked about before on this channel, where persuasion and just charisma rolls basically just didn't matter at all. Unless you're playing a warlock or bard or sorcerer and you really want to have that higher spell modifier, your charisma checks, that's whatsoever, like deception, persuasion, they didn't matter. Unless you were the most important main character, super important group ever. That's the only time it mattered. When you end the entire boss fight in a single persuasion roll, which is stupid in my opinion, still bitter over that. But still, either way, depending on what you say or how you say it or what words you use, sometimes we'll give players points up, a little bonus stuff for what they roll. Because at the end of the day, yeah, it matters what they say, but also the persuasion, deception stuff. It's a game where you roll dice. What you say matters, of course, and definitely should be counting towards it. But your rolls should also matter as well. Because at the end of the day, it's about how you express yourself, what you say specifically, you know? It's a moment for players that play a charismatic character to shine. Whether it's their stupid idiocy just comes out of their mouth and they say something that sounds kind of dumb, but it's actually kind of smart, maybe kind of relatable in the first place, like me, or somebody that is actually eloquent, somebody that's Shakespearean, poetic and stuff. It's a moment for the characters to at least try to get into a roleplay here, and they're missing the mark. They're missing the whole point. And obviously other players are looking at DM being like, what are you gonna do, DM? Are you gonna let him? Are you gonna let him just roll? Are you gonna let him to get away with this? Are you gonna get him to actual roleplay? Are you gonna say no unless you decide, you know, what you want to say and stuff? Because everybody wants to know how the ruling is gonna go. It's gonna be up to to the DM to decide how it goes and how it's handled. Alternatively, why would an Eldritch God even consider listening to me or mortals about trying to persuade him for to do anything or whatever, or at all? Like, at the end of the day, if it's like some sort of an Eldritch outer being God or some sort of entity that is beyond any kind of cosmic reasoning or rationalization, why would he care for puny mortals and their pretty words? Not every character has to listen to persuasion or deception or intimidation. That's just it. Some of them just have no quarrel for it, especially the extremely powerful BBEG. You know, you can probably convince them to maybe delay the plan a little bit or shift it a little bit, but to completely stop it outright, wow, you might as well just persuasion your way out of every single situation at that point. He tells me bluntly, like he's telling me what day of the week it was, despite 2 more attempts to try and finagle him into giving me some form of leverage or offering to prevent a, you know, cataclysmic event from happening. I'm at the pass every time with, I just persuade him to do it. With nothing else, he took my befuddled silence as a green light to roll his dice, and he stood up from his chair with abrupt haste. Natural 19, plus like 12, above 30 persuasion. Now, I've seen this expression many times throughout this campaign. That's just enough to beat a do-or-die DC or getting just enough damage for a how do you want to do this moment. That type of feeling of the right roll at the right time. And as it looks left and right for the celebration of achievement that seems impossible, nothing. Not so much as a word from anybody as they apparently knew what I was going to say before I even needed to. Unfortunately, you offer nothing to persuade him into ceasing his ambitions. He doesn't perceive you accumulatively as a threat to be intimidated. And even if you were deceiving him into backing off, he's not going to be coerced into abandoning his grand design. Thank you, DM. Thank you. Oh, imagine if things went wrong. Imagine if DM just let a persuasion work without, what, 31? Dude got a freaking 31. Thank you, DM, for having the spine to say, whatever you offer, this doesn't work. He sat back down. I continued the monologue in an attempt to get over the awkwardness of the interruption, but after a few sentences, it was hard not to notice him putting his character sheet and book away before slinging his backpack over his shoulder and, while not saying anything, storming out of the store. Made even more awkward as once again, Ranger was his ride home. Tell the party will reckon everything up until the Outer God transformation and pick things up again in 2 weeks. He just felt uncomfortable now and Ranger probably needed to chase Bard down to get him home safely, so it felt like the right thing to do. But I admit, I felt like an a-hole. I'm not asking you dear Redditors to judge if this guy was an a-hole, and after all, splitting the dummy when you don't get your way in a game of Dungeons & Dragons will also be a scene hog and arguably a-hole behavior no matter how you dissect it, especially if it's only from my perspective you draw your information from. But I kind of want this to happen, just not like that. I wanted him to leave on his own accord because I was too anxious to ask him to. I wanted to kill his character, or just wanted Ranger to stop bringing them all together. Whatever would get him to stop harshing the vibes of the game I'd otherwise loved running for friends. I have a lot of things to say, and I definitely want to keep reading because there's still a lot more to cover through. But let me just assure you, DM, you're not the a-hole here. Trust me. If you were to kill the Bard, yeah, I would say, yeah, you're the a-hole, just because you're bitter at him. But in this situation, I don't think so. But before I completely stand by my decision, let's finish the rest of the story. I can understand on a mechanical level where he might have been under the impression his persuasion roll would accomplish what he wanted. The core rulebooks designated DC 30 for impossible tasks, but how lame would it be even if that's how we ran games? If you could just talk to the BBEG out of world domination with vague ideas and basic morality, like some poorly written anime protagonist, how cinematic a climax would that be? I don't regret telling him his persuasion roll didn't work. Natural 20s or any higher roll for that matter doesn't mean you can just chug lava without consequence, but I do feel like the a-hole because I have malicious intent to have him leave at the table prior. And when I finally got that, it felt wrong. I could have approached the rejection of his idea better, as I feel maybe come across as condescending. Maybe I should have just worked up the guts to just ask him not to come back to our games, since it takes exception to how I run them. Either way, I woke up the next day to message from my players that Bart had messaged them all individually saying that I'm an arrogant, wannabe, know-it-all DM, and a piece of crap for taking away his player agency, an awesome character moment. While they've all assured me they don't think the same, I feel that also come from a bias since I am probably the only person who runs games for them and they don't want to discourage me from their own sakes. Maybe that's just a sudden imposter syndrome talking. After the incident, Bart had been making eyes at me from across the store doing work hours and had told me to go screw myself anytime I try to broach some kind of discussion. Wait. So Bart hangs out at the game store just to give you the evil eye, and whenever you try to come up and try to have a cordial conversation, just talk with them, they just say, screw yourself, DM, and just run away like a coward or some kind of child? Why are they at the store? Just to give you the stink eye? That is the weirdest thing to do. Definitely, you would definitely not the a-hole. 100% not the a-hole. Listen, Bart, if the game didn't go great, leave the people alone. If the game didn't go great and this DM is such an a-hole, why are you coming back? Find a better group of non-a-holes if you think that the DM is such an a-hole then. Seriously, even went as far as the store owner to tell me to leave whenever he is in the store. But obviously he had no reason to do that and suggested if he got the problem, maybe he should be the one to leave. Thank you, store owner. He hadn't been back in about 5 days at time of writing, with Ranger seemingly the only one who still actively talks to him. Apparently he messaged the rest of the group individually to invite them to his own campaign, but they've all politely declined. Mostly because he didn't resonate at DM prioritize what they call fun in their eyes. While I don't want to kick the dirt at the guy further, I can't pretend my opinion would be the same. I'll postpone our next session because I still feel quite guilty, and I feel like the a-hole. Not in the karma farming, I didn't do this anything wrong, but I'm a wrong way. I've seen a number of times on AATA posts. I genuinely held discontent for the arrival at games and wanted them to just go away. If there are questions, I'll try to answer them, but Reddit, am I the a-hole? I am going to tell you that you're not the a-hole. This is my personal opinion, and obviously if you share a different one, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I could be completely wrong. Maybe the guy is an a-hole and I'm just wrong. Who knows? Listen, I'm just some dumb tiefling on the internet. But let me know what you think in the comments below. But generally, I think you're not the a-hole. You would be the a-hole if you decided to start murdering the character or trying to get the character killed on purpose just to get the guy to leave somehow. Obviously, if you were to actually want to do that, I understand why you wanted to kill off the character because you were just so fed up and over the player because they were driving you up the wall. Completely understand that. But you don't need to solve in-game issues in-game. You solve them out of game. The best thing would have done is just to put your foot down and say, listen, you're harshing the vibes, you're not meshing with the group. Unless things change, I literally cannot have you at the table. You need to leave. Don't come back. I don't want to have you at the table. We have too much problems and there's not enough chemistry. Sometimes just being direct like this is probably the best thing to do to avoid any further discussion. Just treat it like a band-aid and just let it rip. I'm thinking of Beyblades now. But you didn't kill the character. You let the player play, even if they're driving you insane. And then towards the end, when they have the climactic moment, obviously you don't want the BBEG, the final BBEG, to just be persuaded to screw off. So of course you're not gonna let him to screw off. As a DM, even if somebody rolled, here's the thing, the dude didn't even ask, what do I roll? Can I roll anything? Can I roll persuasion or deception or intimidation? They just rolled. They didn't ask, can I roll this? Can I roll that? If the DM is asking the player to roll, obviously the player should roll to see what the outcome is. But if the player rolls without the DM even prompting them to, why are you rolling? The DM didn't ask you to roll anything. Well, then why are you rolling? Why expecting some sort of an outcome? Why are you putting pressure on the DM to give you some sort of an outcome because you got a high roll? At this point, he's gonna be like, look, DM, I got a high roll. Haha, now you gotta let me do the thing that I want to do. No, you're not entitled to that. The DM tells you to roll, you roll, DM tells you the outcome, and that's how it goes. You don't just roll whenever you want to for anything in the world, you know? That can be honestly the most annoying thing. And that's actually the most a-hole thing to do. Just rolling just because you want to roll, just because you just feel like you're rolling for anything at all in the entire world. There's nothing wrong if you want to do like a silly roll, like you're just messing around with friends, or you're doing something silly in the water and say, I try to pick up a fish. DM, can I would like to roll acrobatics to see if I slip on some rock. And you roll, oh, my character slips, ha 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 ha, you know, something silly and fun and lighthearted like this that doesn't have any consequence. That's fine. If you want to do like some sort of a self roll, or you do a self roll to see if your character, how they're going to react, whether they're going to be able to handle the situation or maybe even panic a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that, because at the end of the day, you're influencing your role play. As long as it doesn't influence anything mechanically and you're not rolling for some sort of mechanical reasons, then I think it's perfectly fine. But don't just roll dice for attempts with stuff when DM doesn't even prompt you to roll them. There are some edits to the post, but I'm just going to summarize them. Basically, would it be cool if like a Shakespearean bard actually said something super eloquent and ended the fight in such a cool way? Somebody that was more involved? Yeah, but the player just kind of didn't give DM anything to work with, so the DM didn't feel like it was really warranted or really deserved some sort of a proper outcome. Just because you roll high doesn't mean you actually get to do the thing. Especially like I said, if DM doesn't prompt you to roll, why are you rolling in the first place? To get some sort of an advantage or a leg up or something? I don't know. And the second edit was about not talking to the guy, which apparently the DM did talk to the guy a lot, and they covered about about it, that they had a lot of conversations about it. And I mean, they covered in the story as well. Any single time something happened, DM would say something, the player would stop for a little bit, and then continue on with the bad behavior immediately right after. It just was a never-ending thing. Honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think you're the a-hole. I think you handle yourself fine, and maybe it's just a lesson for the future to put your foot down a little bit early so you don't have this weird awkward moment with now the bard giving you a stink eye at a game store. Why are they even coming back to the game store just to give you a stink eye? That is the weirdest behavior here. I mean, there's a lot of weird behavior from the bard, but that alone is just extremely inappropriate. That alone is just nuts to me. Like, yeah, I get the game went bad, but don't come back to the store just to give the DM a stink eye. That's just extra weird. And with that, that's gonna be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching, and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down, or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales Tomorrow. Bye-bye.